Hey, hi everybody. So today I've got with me Ben Hawks, and we're gonna have a really interesting discussion, plenty of subjects to cover. And I think we're just gonna jump right in. So you listen to the Open1 podcast, and the first question we have today, Ben, what are your thoughts on the situation in Ukraine and Russia right now?
Dear, oh dear. That's a big one. First of all, Travis, I'd like to say thank you for your invitation. And more importantly, thank you on behalf of the human race for the fight that you're fighting. It's been rather inspirational. And thank you for that, genuinely. Keep up the skier.
Pleasure.
What do I think about Russia, Ukraine? My father made the mistake of asking me that a couple of weeks, about 2 weeks ago.
Hmm.
And he doesn't really know the full extent of my worldview. So it was quite interesting telling Martin Parr of the home counties, well, West London, that's where we hail from. My version of events while kind of juggling my true nature, as it were, because they're not ready for that shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but fuck it, I did.
You fucking right are. No way.
Crack on. But we try to I do a podcast called The Wake Up with my mentor Kern Frost and the Co-Creative Better World movement, and we try to go through this on as many levels as we possibly could. So I'm a student of politics. My degree was international relations. I actually did my dissertation on the Russian army in the post-Soviet era. So I've got a bit of form on this, but I have to be completely honest. A lot of what I used to know has gone stale. So we try to look at it from the perspective of an ethnic conflict, and there certainly is bits of that in there. You know, the Donbass, all those kind of regions are Russian speakers. And when you look at a lot of the polling data, the election results, you can see certainly in that eastern Ukraine, results are skewed towards Russian parties with Russian sympathy. So there's an ethnic dimension there which shouldn't be ignored. There's a great game element, nation against nation, bloc against bloc, where NATO have moved incrementally to the West inadvisedly. And I say that as a former soldier, inadvisedly. So there's that element to it that they should have known better. But then there's the element that I really, really like, which is the kind of what is Putin up to? You know, when you sit in Moscow and you look west, you can see lots and lots of flat ground. You've got the Dnieper there. And Putin, who lost his uncle and a couple of brothers in the Second World War, he's probably looking, thinking, that's good tank country. You know, I'm sat here in Moscow. That's good tank country. That's where they're coming. If they get over the Dnieper, they're going to have me, just like Hitler tried or Napoleon tried or whatever. So there's a geographical angle to it. So I think it's perfectly reasonable that he should go and spike the guns of any potential threat to his country. So that's kind of where I wanted to end when I was speaking to my mum and dad. But I went further, because the day after they went in, and I went on my Telegram groups, of which I follow many, with yours, which is fantastic. And I saw that overlay of biolabs with strike pattern where they were going. Even at my stage of awakeness, whatever you want to call it, I still looked at him and thought, nah, rubbish. No, Putin's ex-KGB. He's been president or prime minister for last 10 or 15 years. He's a classic Russian dictator in the Soviet model. He can't be doing that. And then over the days, I've been saying to people, the conspiracy theory to fact latency period is down to about 5-7 days.
Yeah,
at this point, in March 22.
Up, huh? Yeah, man.
It's incredible. When we were going through the whole COVID business, we would go, right, PCR tests don't work. You're an idiot, conspiracy theorist. And here we are now. Oh, yeah, CDC, it didn't work. But now we're going biolabs. What biolabs? And then we've got, what's her name? Christina Nyland, Julia Nyland, whoever she is, a kind of obscure staffer at the State Department, gets up in front of Congress and goes, those biolabs. Sorry. I didn't think, I thought you meant the other ones. The ones that Barack Obama didn't put in place in 2015 when he's out there with John McCain. And then when you start peeling back the layers over that, you start to get a very, very different picture. You know, the world was interesting. The world is very interesting with history, with ethnography, with geography, with religion, and all these things coalescing into what's usually incredibly complicated and nuanced. And then you put the fucking New World Order on the top of that. If you take that tracing paper and you stick that on top of that, you're thinking, oh my God in heaven. You know, I thought I was some big shit at university sitting in front of, you know, my professor was a good friend of Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the UN at the time. So we go to a lecture. he would say, oh, Kofi was telling me this. And we're like, fuck, we're in the fucking nexus of international politics here. But then the guy who marked my dissertation, Richard Sakwa, who's a very eminent history professor at University of Kent, he's very good. He turned up on a podcast saying, oh, this is the most axiomatic moment in nuclear war, potential nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I'm staring at this guy who marked my dissertation going, you don't know what you're talking about, do you? And you go on talk radio and you listen to, I listened to it in one 5-minute, oh, it was awful. A guy at University of Buckingham, professor, who were very good at military history, guy from University College London, and then a guy from Cambridge, all history professors, specialists in either Near East, Eastern European, whatever. And they all just got on and talk absolute garbage. And it's difficult sometimes because, you know, God, we may be wrong. You know, we may be damn wrong. Putin might be a classic dictator. He's on a land grab. War is usually armed robbery writ large, and that's the way it is, or it's politics as an extension of enemies, blah, blah, blah. We might be wrong, but I don't think we are. I think Putin, as Cliff High put it, is a righteous dude, and he is firing the first shots of the war, potentially against the New World Order, debt slavery system, Western central banking system, Khazarian mafia, whatever badge you want to put on it. I get the strong feeling that this is him going, do you know what? This is it. You come here and no further. And it's really good fun to watch. And I've got to be careful because we're talking about people. And in war, the people who always lose out are, you know, down, you know, they're struggling anyway, and they get fucking slammed, and it's awful. And the guys in the trenches, war's not cool. I've not been in one, but I trained for one. It's not cool. So we've got to be careful about this kind of popcorn element of crumbs. Let's see what happens next. What's on Hunter Biden's laptop? But it does feel like this is a very, very interesting time to be alive. And I am fascinated by what happens next. There are no rules. And this comes from a kid of the Cold War who was constantly in terror of the 4-minute warning and the world blowing up while he was in the bath. But I've lost complete fear of any of that. I just think it's absolutely fascinating. And the world is going to be a completely different place in 10 or 15 years. And I keep telling my daughter, who's 1 and doesn't know what the fuck I'm talking about, that the world she takes on is going to be one that we couldn't have imagined 5 or 10 years ago. Free, potentially, away from debt slavery, away from this horrible system. Imagine that, sparkly unicorns all around. Yeah, so yeah, that's probably the longest answer you've ever had to a 7 to 10 word question, but there it is, for better or worse.
It's perfect. It's what we like. Yeah, man. So when I started, it's like I was a little bit curious at first what's going on here. Okay, both sides of the media, obviously, you know, in Russia and America, they're going to say that we're the good guys. But then when I started to see George Soros sort of taking the side of Ukraine, I was like, wait, hang on a minute.
I'm not with that guy.
Yeah, like I'm instantly not going to be siding with you at least. So I'm going to look a little bit to the, you know, what you're trying to hide from me. And the more I see it, it's like, okay. And then McDonald's, the Swift banking system, Apple, Amazon, and then I know Putin was a member of the World Economic Forum, and but then he had his profile taken down from the website. And I don't know if that was just...
I was a member of the Tory party up until 12 months ago, so we can't damn the man for that. But Soros, have you seen the background of what Soros did in I always say Canada back in '92, and how he kicked most of this thing off? It goes way back. It's absolutely fascinating, because up in Edmonton in Canada, there's quite a large Ukrainian diaspora. And back in '92, old Georgie boy, him of the Hungarian Jewish bent, who ended up in Argentina at the end of the war with all the loot, he started putting together networks in Canada and started identifying people to go ahead as a bridgehead to Ukraine, and started essentially taking over civil society. He would put people in universities to start influencing the narrative around good democracy, bad democracy, blah, blah, blah. He put in place, believe it or not, 2 anti-corruption units to play against each other, see who could be worse at their fucking job. And eventually he moved the society into a place where they actively kind of sought out our kind of democracy, and that really made it quite fertile ground for people like Barry Obama and John McCain to go down in 2005 and start checking out biolabs, and under the guise of biological warfare threat reduction, i.e. going into the post-Soviet territories and making sure their nerve gas wasn't the bad nerve gas and all that kind of stuff. They started to do what we see now, which potentially, according to Mr. Trump and his China theory, may be that, you know, COVID actually came from Ukraine. Wouldn't that be a turn up for the books?
Wouldn't it just? And then, yeah, it's like, obviously it's American funded biolabs in Ukraine, but then it's the people that have been controlling much of America who have been pulling the strings here. So
who do we think they are? Come on, let's see your theories. I know you're meant to be interviewing me, but come on, bear with me. Who do you think those people are?
Yeah, so I guess the very top of that pyramid, you have like the Council of 13. You got that? You've got those. Because you ever seen that graph or that
I have,
graph, right? And at the very top of that, it's like the Rothschild, Rockefellers, and all those families. But I think, I don't know if it's within the scope of this podcast, but even above that, you've got an overriding controlling power. Some people like to call them aliens, but I don't know exactly what they are, but something that might not be human. But on the human level, on the 3D matrix, yeah, I think that's what you would call the Rothschild, Rockefeller, all of these really rich and powerful families. And then below that, you've just got subsets of either variously corporations or just rich and powerful people that are probably tied in with blackmail and stuff like BlackRock and other various investment companies and stuff like that. So they say just follow the money, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one when you talk to normies, and I'm some of my best friends are normies, and you put across this idea that there is a coordination, there is an intent, there is a meshing, there is a networking of evil, and people usually go, oh God, they can't even organize a piss up in a brewery. How in God's name are they meant to coordinate on a worldwide basis plots to keep us down? And I always say, listen, there are two things here. The first is not everybody has to know. You know, a lot of life exists on a nudge, a wink, wink, and a bit of money, or do a job as PM and we'll give you a job at the CFR for 5 years, or you can, I don't know, be editor at the Evening Standard or get tenure at the University of Columbia or whatever. You know, that kind of enmeshment into the network is very normal, very boring, and smacks of how the world works. And the other side of it is intent, because there is a real failure of imagination when people look at the world as it probably is. Because what you're talking about there at the top level, we're talking about evil. You know, we're talking about good and evil. We're talking about the supernatural. And I have this conversation with people all the time. I used to be a kind of Jam and Jerusalem Protestant Christian, you know, bit of muscular Christianity, all that kind of stuff. And I still believe in God. In a sense, I believe in the creator. Religion is a perfectly usable thing if you're going to come to it with the right attitude and use it as a bridge to the divine. But when people talk about that sort of stuff, they stop short of talking about the supernatural element to it. You know, the fact that there is good and there is evil, and we are seeing it play out on a massive stage. I've heard it called the topic of topics. You know, what's above there? Is it the bug? Is it the aliens? Is it the archons, etc., etc.? I don't know. I haven't got a clue. But I know there's something there. Well, no, I don't know that. And that's the one thing I've probably learned most over the last 2 years, is that to state I know about something is generally an unhealthy habit, because what it does is two things. First of all, it stops you from looking into an alternative hypothesis, which is a bad thing, because no one person apart from him up there or her or it or whatever. What did you say? It's
yes. It's
yeah,
the only time I won't use a gender term, and it's like, yeah, okay, God is just it.
Well, it is. I mean, God is energy. God is love. Whatever you want to call it, whatever floats anyone's boat. We're having the same conversation. But when people talk about these things, they instantly dismiss the kind of supernatural elements. The idea that the Holy Spirit, if that nomenclature is relevant to how you view life, is actually us. is that we have within us a spark of the divine. We're one very equal part of the triumvirate. You know, we've got God, we've got his son, and we've got us. And that you and I are essentially the same person. Well, not essentially, we are the same person in terms of a shared consciousness. It's just that we're kept prisoned by the brain, by the body, by the ego, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's the real battle. It's 1 square foot of real estate every single time.
Yeah, man. And that's it. And it's quite empowering when we sort of go into, okay, yeah, so we actually have like a divine framework on our side, because a lot of people in the activist movement, they do sort of, they wake up to the 3D matrix of things and they get stuck on that. And you know, it can seem very dark and negative if you don't have like a spiritual foundation to really guide you through that and relate back to, then it can be quite tough. And I think it's humbling but also empowering to know that there are greater positive forces here, and there is this greater battle, if you like, spiritual battle between good and evil. And I guess we can get into a little bit. I mean, I do think, I guess if we won't say I know, my best guess is that there is some sort of higher negative force that is controlling humanity, and it works through their human puppets. And like you say, the topic of all topics, Wetiko, this mind virus, this evil beings of otherworldly origins that seem to have enslaved a lot of humanity for quite a long time, it seems. And we might be approaching their end game, whatever that is, which actually ties into a little bit about what we could talk about as well, because transhumanism seems to be a big part of that, and people are very scared about like the merging of man and machine. But then also what I think we mentioned briefly before we started is technology can be really useful, and I think perhaps part of transhumanism might involve AI. But is that to say that these technologies completely, I mean, I don't know about actually merging with a machine, but stuff like artificial intelligence or other technologies that could actually be beneficial to mankind, because the bad guys might use them some way for some evil agenda. Well, I mean, what are your thoughts about artificial intelligence?
It's well, first of all, I would like to state my position on transhumanism, which is I find the idea gross and abhorrent, and I rarely take a strong. Well, no, that's wrong. I don't really take strong positions on moral issues. I'm happy to. I think we're perfect, and what you described there is really interesting, and it's something worth speaking to. That a lot of the groups that I'm on, who are they're guys and girls who are awake, they know what's going on, but there's so much anger and there's so much bitterness born of fear. They're all fucked off. You know, Pfizer wankers, blah, blah, blah. None of that is not, you know, that's not wrong. That's true. But you got to move on from it. You've got to push on through. You know, the system works. I mean, their system, the matrix works. It wouldn't have stayed here for that long if it wasn't self-optimizing. And it's because, you know, the Khazarians, whatever you want to call them, they love process, they love systems because they're incredibly lazy. And they want the system to manage the humans. And that's kind of how they look at it. You can't hate it because it's just a system. It does its job. And there's a lot of people who are kind of pushed down, not so much by fear, because they've kind of come through that, but they're pushed down by this hatred and this bitterness and this pissed offness. And I get it, but move on, just crack on, because you're not going to solve any problems. And there is an element of people can't really break free of their spiritual prison because they're scared of admitting to themselves that they might be fucking awesome. That they might. No, it's a serious point. Yeah. People, it's easier to be unhappy a lot of the time. Now, I don't agree with that statement, and I'll tell you why in a second. But for a lot of people, it's easier to be unhappy. It's easier to complain. It's easier to stay where you are. It's easier to be limited. It's easier not to want to move on. It's easier not to want to think strategically and stay in your box. It's just there's less energy expended. But here's the thing. Fuck that. And why I say that is that we are genuinely limitless beings. And I know that because my brain is no different to your brain. It works the same in broad terms. What's different, and this is where me and you as a comparison kind of falls down, but let's say a guy who's driving a bus and doesn't know his topic of topics from his Tottenham Hotspur. We've got the same brain, but I've learned how to use mine. I've learned how to challenge the fucker, to make new bridges, new neural pathways, all those sorts of things. And while people are awake to what's going on, what they're not doing is moving through those limitations, moving through that fear, that bitterness, that hatred, all that kind of stuff, and popping out and going, actually, fucking hell, do you know what? We're perfect. And do you know what? The world is awesome. And do you know what? The battle is going to be won in 1 square foot of real estate, if only we can move on from it. And that's what we do at Co-Create a Better World in the Council of Human Development. We have a training protocol, a system, whatever you want to call it. We call it a training platform, which basically gets rid of the ego, allows you to go clear. So you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. And I don't mean in the moral sense. We don't go around, pillaging villages. I mean, you can do stuff that you've always wanted, write books, make a movie, put out a music video, whatever. But you asked me about AI. So I was saying transhumanism, awful, abhorrent, because we're perfect, which I think was probably my point. We were given this consciousness, we were given this body, given this face, such as it is, and we were given the potential to act out whatever we want to act out and grow. And that's kind of the whole point of being here, is to grow. The nature of the universe is to grow. It's either progressive or regressive. We've got to keep moving forward. So AI, interesting one. Now, it's going to happen. We can't stop it. It's going to happen. And I understand that's a limiting thought, but it is.
Yeah, that's very certain.
Yeah, it is. It's just progress. It is. I suppose the momentum has been, I don't know, the Newtonian principle of motion. And God willing, that's correct what I'm saying. And people are going, oh, Ben knows physics. I don't. I'm actually taking a 50-50 chance on the Newtonian principle of motion being actually what I'm fucking talking about. What I'm talking about is it has momentum. And I'm not entirely sure it's going to stop. And we can see it anyway. You walk into Sainsbury's and you don't buy something off a person anymore. You buy it off one person with responsibility for 8 bays, whose job is to go around saying, yes, you can have an aspirin. Yes, you can have a bottle of wine. Oh, that's a lot of bottle of wine. Do you need some aspirin with that? Blah, blah, blah. So we're seeing it already. And we're seeing it already because corporations and directors have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value. You don't need an MBA to work that out. And you can maximize shareholder value better if you employ less people. So we're going to see these things more and more and more. The problem for me, and the problem for us at Co-Create, is that when AI gets to a certain point, the singularity, i.e. it becomes self-aware, then it's going to look at us and go, you created me? Are you serious? Nah, don't worry about it. I'm off. And that'll be that. We'll be human beings. We'll be serfs and slaves in our own kingdom, and the masters will be off, writing a symphony in a minute. But, and it's a big but, it's the second big but that I've come to in about 2 or 3 minutes, I think. What machines can't do is contextual thinking. You'll never find an AI comedian, for instance. They can't do it because comedy's about, link analysis and pulling together different concepts that don't quite gel, but do kind of work, and finding that friction and getting in the logos and taking it along, that kind of stuff. So they're not going to do that. They're not very good at being creative. They might come up with something akin to a constable. They might come up with a symphony, whatever, but it's not going to have that kind of spark of the divine. I say that a lot, that kind of spark of humanity about it. And there are lots of things that machines can do. Lots of things machines can't do that we can do. And essentially our position at Co-Create, Council of Human Development, is that you're not going to stop AI. You're not going to get in the way of what's happening. You can be as Luddite as you like, but it's not going to work. So what we need to do is work with AI. We need to become pathfinders. So we need to have within us the ability, not so much to challenge AI, yes, but not in the kind of, Terminator 12 sense, trying to shut the fucker down with the nuclear weapon or whatever. Although I'm not against that. Let me state my position there. Especially if Sarah Connors is involved. She was my first crush as a teenage boy. God bless her. But we've got to be a partner to AI, and we can. But to do that, we've got to expand our thinking. We can't be constantly in the limbic brain, constantly in process-led thinking, constantly just thinking about, Netflix and a glass of wine, where's my next paycheck coming from, blah, blah, blah. We've got to break free from all of that in order to think clearly without kind of egoic suppression. And believe me, I had a massive one. It's been a bit of a trial getting rid of it, although having a small child helps because you're basically a pointless human being. You just keep them alive. That's good for the ego. But we've got to be free of all of that. We've got to be free of limits in order to partner with AI. Otherwise, we're going to be second-class citizens in the world, regardless of what happens with a new world order, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we think anyway. Is it wrong? Possibly. But it's what we suspect.
Yeah, so I've for a while have held the belief, like, if there is some way a machine can do a job instead of a human, then why not? It's just we have this like idea that's sort of built into us that must have job, everyone must have job, and I guess we want people to be doing stuff and productive, but it's like, so a new technology was created and it can do this pointless, meaningless job way efficiently than all these humans. Oh no, that's such a bad thing. Wait, why?
Yeah,
Why is
absolutely.
that such a bad thing?
But this is the odd thing about technology. You look at it and you go, where's my rocket pack? Where's my fucking space shuttle? What happened to all that stuff? Did it happen? There's a podcast episode. But you're thinking, right, do we need work? Do we need workshop people? Carpenters, that's what I'm looking for. Do we need carpenters to make IKEA dining tables? Possibly not. Do we need them to pack them? No, I don't think so. Do we need them to deliver them? No, don't think you need to do that either. But do you need them? If you want to buy a beautiful kind of thing hewn of oak that you can put in your massive living room and talk about ad nauseum, I've got one of those. It's far too big for my living room. We're trying to sell it at the moment. If anyone wants to buy an oak dining table, it's far too big for my 3-bedroom house. Please do email me. But there will always be a space for it. And you're right. Human life should be a joy, man. It should be this. It should be trading consciousness. It should be trading ideas. It should be saying, right, come on, what can I do for you? It shouldn't be. And this is where we get a bit utopian and people go, oh no, it's absolute rubbish. You need to work and blah, blah, blah. No, you fucking don't. You fucking don't. And I know that because what I do is kind of work, exchanging stuff for money, but it ain't no job. You don't have to do it. But you're absolutely right. Why be afraid of outsourcing stuff that we just don't want to do?
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, right. And I just wonder, I ponder, do we have to have a certain kind of a human that can be in that and still be like, I don't know, self-motivated or creative and productive if it wasn't for this, like, this is how you have to do things? I don't know. I think about that.
I would say absolutely not. I would say if there is a human being out there with a functioning heart, functioning brain, functioning, one of the above, eyes, hands, whatever, you have the building blocks of being a limitless creative human being. It's just a question of what you're held back by. And what we say, well, what I say, because I'm a bit more rough and ready than a lot of people in the Council for Human Development, something to do with looking like Phil Mitchell and being from London. But essentially what we have, well, what I see when I see my daughter is just completely undiluted joy and creativity. She'll look at a piece of wood and you'll think, what the hell is she thinking? What's going on there? And you go into her head and she's actually got a spaceship in her hand. And I'm stood there thinking, oh, is she going to get a splinter? And that's the way we're meant to be. So if you look at a study was done in 1992 by a guy called Dr. Robert Land and I think it's Debbie Jarman, but don't quote me on the Christian name there. But it was done in 1992. And they were commissioned by the US government because the US government were very aware that their hegemony in terms of technology and development was waning. Technology was going to the East, and I mean the Middle East and the Soviet Union. Well, at that point, not the Soviet Union, mainly the Far East, because, well, the war came in 1989. And they wanted to know what the United States had to do in order to keep its monopoly on being in charge. And we can leave the petrodollar aside for 1 minute. What they realized was it was about creative thinking, creative problem solving and innovation. And that was the thing that had to be developed in order to keep US hegemony. So they did a study. So they looked at kids at 5, at 10, at 15, and then again at 21. And they found that age 5, children, that's 98% of children tested in the upper percentile for genius level creativity and problem solving. So that was just inherent. It doesn't matter where you came from, upbringing up until that point, whether you had a good meal inside you and a pint of milk in your morning break, whatever, they were all creative geniuses. Bear with me, let's say all, because, a very few amounts were not. Once you get to 10, that number had gone down by an order of magnitude. Once you got to 15, that number had gone down by an order of magnitude. Once they got to 21, they had to stop the study because everyone got so depressed, because education had beaten that creativity down, down until they couldn't solve the way out of a paper bag. And this is what we see through society. And we've got to go back to basis. To educate doesn't mean to teach or to school. It means to lead out. You know, you look back to Latin derivation, it means to lead out, to find something that people are great at and inspire them to be good at it. Because I don't need to be good at maths if I want to be a carpenter. You know, I'm still going to create the best fucking chair you've ever seen. You know, I don't need to be good at English literature in order to create a great omelette and go and train in Paris. You know, you find your talent, you crack on, you move. But we've now inherited this situation. We're just suppressed. We get knowledge put into us. We get societal views and habits and theories and, well, actually dogma. Let's call it what it is. The UK education system at the moment is just full of dogma of the most horrible, divisive kind that is seemingly designed to keep us apart from each other on a humane level. And we end up coming out really well trained for our role. And our role is not to be happy. Our role is not to create. Our role is not to find the one thing that really makes our heart happy, as my wife says, God bless her. Our role is to just take our servile little box and pay tax, and that's it. And the tax doesn't go to pay for public services; it goes to pay for the public debt. You know, that's the deal the central bankers have made, and our job is to be consumers within that vending machine. And in order to fit into that vending machine, it's a terrible thing to have creative thought and innovation. It's awful. We get away with some of it, but not very much. So to answer your question again, Christ, you asked a reasonably short question, and I'm using up so much time. I'm happy to go with 2 hours if you want to.
Keep going.
But this is about realizing that whoever you are, wherever you come from, if you want to be a fucking genius, be a fucking genius, because you are a fucking genius. If you want to be perfect, because you are perfect. If you want to write a book, write a fucking book. You don't have to have the inspiration or the knowledge or the whatever in your head, because that's not how this works. You know, anybody who is given the inspiration to write a wonderful symphony or a wonderful book or a comic book or whatever, they don't have that talent. They're given that talent. They don't have that inspiration. They're given that inspiration. That comes to whom it is deserved by. And I think I've got the grammar right there. You know, when generally when I have an idea for something, it turns out to be quite cool. I've got nothing in my head. You know, I'm staring out. Boredom is great, by the way. We need to teach our kids how to be bored more, because when you're bored, that's when the ideas pop in. But actually, if you're conscious, you tend not to get bored very much. But if I'm not thinking about something, I used to get really anxious about my head being empty. Like before I came on here, I was just sat here. I had absolutely nothing in my head. I was like,
perfect.
Oh, Christ. What if he asked this? I'm like, nah, who gives a shit? Not who gives a shit. I'm really happy to be here. I want to add value to what you're doing. But it's about just that, you know, we talked about the download from the quantum field, that kind of stuff. That's where the inspiration comes from. It can strike at any time, but you've got to be ready for it. And that's a really interesting thing to labor on. You've got to be ready for success. And also you've got to be thinking completely clear. And when I say thinking completely clear, just don't fucking think. Don't worry about it. You know, the world is basically going to be okay. You know, it's cool. You might not have enough money to make rent. Don't worry about that. Something will turn up. It'll be absolutely fine. That's what people need to do. But they don't, because they're scared. And that's cool. I understand that. And they're scared because the system is designed to make them scared, because otherwise they might try and be happy. And we don't want that now, do we, Travis? Jesus Christ. Pardon me.
Might find their own freedom if they start getting too happy.
Yeah, God forbid. Dear, oh dear. Well, there we go.
So do you practice any sort of body mind practices yourself, like meditation or anything like that?
I do. I went to a Chinese medicine specialist last year, and I was meeting a client in Wales who was he was a roughy tufty valley boy, property developer, rugby player. You would look at him and think, you know, alpha bloke, very successful. And we had a good meeting. We did some business, and I said, "Where are you off to?" He said, "I'm going to go and do some energy work." I was like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to do some energy work." I said, well, you need to sit down with Utility Warehouse and work out what tariff you're on. No, I do Qigong. And I was like,
Oh,
if a geezer like that does Qigong, maybe there's something in it. Because he was, normally successful. He was outwardly successful. And he's a really good bloke. So I went to a Chinese medicine specialist and just had a chat, really. Gave the man 150 quid. He's an ex-investment banker, round the corner from me in Bath. And we had a chat about various bits and bobs. Had a bit about a childhood trauma that I had that was giving me depression. It turned out that I was being depressed about entirely the wrong thing. It was hilarious. We talked about diet, and he said, well, you need to do Qigong every morning and drink lots of green tea. I said, well, green tea tastes like piss, but I will do Qigong. So I started doing that every morning. I say every morning, probably in the aggregate, probably 1.5 times over 2 days, because I miss quite a few. But I do about half an hour of that, usually with one of those 432 hertz things you find on YouTube with these lovely frequencies.
nice, man. Yeah.
I used to do Qigong while like listening to a Cliff High video or the X22 report or whatever. And I'd find myself just angry for the rest of the day. And I was like, no, this is wrong. I've got to actually meditate properly. So I do now. And it physically, it's great. My chiro thinks I'm incredible. Why wouldn't she? But I mean in the flexible sense. I tend to have ideas and get myself set up for the day when I'm doing that and realize, just get rid of my to-do list and think, actually, that's what I need to achieve today in order to do it. So it's very, very useful. The science is obvious with it. The science around meditation is obvious. I don't know numbers very well, but there are, what was I reading? It was Mind Hacking Happiness by Sean Webb, I think it was. And he went through the scientific basis of meditation and the successful outcomes. It's obvious, but also the spiritual part of it is very, very important as well, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you mentioned Qigong. Not a lot of people know about that so much in the West.
Really?
No, it's what I come across. Everyone knows about meditation, yoga, but Qigong, not so much. And myself, yeah, I think it's about 8 years ago, I actually met my Qigong teacher on a beach, just quite magically, actually.
Are we talking kind of Eastbourne, or are we talking Thailand here?
This was in this coast of Essex in Harwich. So,
oh, wonderful!
You imagine?
I love an Essex beach.
Couldn't believe our eyes. Me and my friend were just talking and chatting, and then about 20 feet to our right, this woman just starts sitting down and meditating, and you just never see that in my town. I just couldn't believe it. Eventually went over and started speaking to her, and she turns out to be a guru, if you like. She's been doing it 25 years, and she's just going to start up some classes in my local town. And yeah, that began my Qigong journey, and I really, really like it. Although this year I've been getting a lot more into yoga. I've been meditating I keep meditating all the time, but yeah, and I really like, because what I really like about Qigong is when someone who is a little bit skeptical about energy stuff, and I'm like, I can fucking feel it. I can feel it in my hands. Like, I don't know how you're supposed to take that away from someone when they can actually feel this shit, and you can move it around your body. And so, yeah, I find a great benefit from Qigong, yoga, meditation. And when you was talking about having a clear mind, no thoughts, I was like, okay, you must do something, right?
Absolutely. And I've become completely unself-conscious about it as well. And when me and the wife would go to the beach, I'd never take my shoes off, and I could have been wearing a tied fucking hanky on my head. I was so trussed up with kind of self-doubt and whatever. But now I just don't give a fuck. And one of my favorite things about the pandemic was not wearing a mask in supermarkets.
Oh, yes.
I absolutely loved it. And it wasn't just that I was a rebel, although that was part of it. It was more that I was able to spread joy, because it was almost that people forgot what a smiling face looked like. And, mine isn't much to speak of, but, when I get my gurn going, I can inspire some hilarity. So one week I read about somebody who got around the bylaws or whatever they were, mandates, massively unlawful, but by singing. So I'd walk around, I was a classically trained singer, so I'd walk around singing Phantom of the Opera in the meat aisle. And people are like, what? And you just smile at them, and they can't help themselves. They smile back. They're in fear. They've got their fucking face nappy on. They don't realize they're being programmed, but they're smiling because there's this man with a shiny head singing All I Ask of You next to the lamb cutlets. And then you go and have a real conversation with somebody at the checkout, and you're just nice. I was in Wales last week, and they're a holdout. They've still got their mask mandate in shops. And I thought, right, Tesco's, I'm not wearing a mask in there. There was a shop in the village we were in, and I wore a mask in there because it was the only place I could buy a pint of fucking milk for 15 miles. And I thought, okay, fine, I'm going to do that. Didn't wear one of those blue ones with graphene oxide in. I just stuck a nappy over my face, a real nappy. And no, I didn't. That was I don't know why I said that. But I went into Tesco's without the mask and kind of walked around it. I'm an Englishman. I'm in a mask. I don't give a fuck. And this tiny little lady, she was stood just on her own, looking around, and people walking past her. And she saw me, this kind of big goon with her face. And she tapped me on the shoulder. And I thought, oh, here we go. And which was uncharitable in hindsight. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, love. Can you reach up there and get me some dentist sticks? My dog bloody loves them, you see. And I was like, of course I will, my love. No problem at all. Got her dentist sticks. Anything else I can do for you? Oh, no, you are very kind. And I just thought to myself, all those people walking past her, wearing those dehumanizing nappies, and she picks me, the unmasked COVID machine, the lawbreaker, to get her dentist sticks, probably because she just saw a human being, as opposed to these kind of pinhole fear-based eyes. It's quite sad, really. But again, I love that because I love human beings. I love people, especially the Welsh ones, because they're lovely and singy-songy.
Love that accent.
That sounded Pakistani, actually.
The first one was better. The little lady was on point.
I need to stop that.
That was on point. But yeah, I used to argue, debate when people were saying, well, actually, I'm going to wear a mask because it makes other people feel safe. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Actually, I don't think it does. I think maybe on a conscious level, because they're programmed with this fear, but actually subconsciously, people want to see people's faces. They want to see a smile. They want to see your eyes. It's like, actually, I'm not wearing a mask because I want to make people feel all right. And
absolutely. Convince people that we are all human beings. We're all in this together. And I don't mean it as in the pandemic blitz that we've just been through, whatever the fuck that was. We're in life together, man. How can you bomb another human being because that person is you? Oh, fuck me. Newsflash. But you're absolutely right. I wouldn't let people wear a mask around my daughter. Because I just don't want that shit for her. Now, I've read the papers, and I know there's a 25% more chance of her being a sociopath or whatever. She's got no chance, not with a golden retriever in the house. There's too much love. But I don't want to, take that chance, or to have her believe that the normal state of affairs for a human society is that we cover ourselves up and we don't talk to each other, we don't touch each other, etc., etc. No, not in the Joe Biden way, apparently that sort of thing.
Yeah, man. So one thing I like to ask people as well is, because I'm quite fascinated on how there was this overriding thing, the pandemic, whatever, but what happened is, country by country, it seemed to be the same playbook but played out differently. And for some reason, England come out of it quite fast in comparison to other countries, and still. I have admins, we did a team meeting just last week, and I'm talking to them, and they're from Canada, Australia, and America, and it's still a big thing there. They still can't, it's still happening. There's still vaccine passports everywhere, and I'm like, well, why did England get out of it so quickly compared to these other countries? Is it because each nation has its own sort of collective karma, collective consciousness, reality creation abilities? Is that because if we look at it on the individual level, I believe we do have that ability to varying degrees to pull in experiences and push some away. So does that pull together, and is it to do with like the actual level of evolution of the people in the nation pulling together? Do you see what I mean? Or is it the karma, consciousness?
I think it's probably, sadly for us, I think it's probably a little more 2D than that. When you look at Canada, Canadians will always test well on the agreeableness scale, as will the Germans, and that's a lot of the reason why Nazism was allowed to grow and fester in that country in that particular time. So Canadians are very nice people. I once went on an exercise with Canadian paratroopers. They were mental. They liked burning insects and blowing shit up and drinking beer, but they were really nice people. Australia, I don't get. That's why I don't understand it. I don't understand New Zealand either. New Zealand are in the thrall of that horrible horse-faced possible man Jacinda Ardern, who's straight from the West playbook, and it's vile. And all the Kiwis I've met are rebellious, sovereign, smart, difficult to get down, but they seem to have marched themselves into that prison. It's bizarre. Same with the Aussies. The Aussies have basically given up their constitution over the course of this. They've created a level of government between the states and the Governor General that wasn't there before, called the National Parliament, because they felt they had to coordinate their ridiculous COVID strategy. But again, I read more into it, and apparently Aussies are actually quite docile and easy to control, which I find very odd, because the digger spirit, the frontier spirit, all that kind of stuff. The United States is not one country. And a lot of people, and this is where nuance comes in with politics and history and geography and those sorts of things. The United States is not one country. It's not even it's a phony corporation, actually, but that's a subject for another day. In the United Kingdom, I think the answer is probably more mundane, in that our lockdowns, we were bounced into them by the unions, who wanted either control or holiday, or George Soros had their hand up their arse. We were bounced into it by what that doom goblin came out with at Imperial, and the computer models, which are based on God knows what. And they were based on essentially a big wad of money that Bill Gates gave them to supercharge the lockdown. And there are factions within the government. You had Michael Gove, who's basically a fucking Sith Lord, and Matt Hancock. And then you got poor old Boris in the middle, put upon by his green girlfriend, who's a libertarian at heart and probably didn't want to lock down, but probably felt a little bullied by the situation. So does that mean he's not weffed up to fuck? His daddy really loved population control. But again, it's all about nuance. China, we think they're one of the good guys, but they've just given 1.3 million euros to Ukraine. If they invade Taiwan, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are they going off the biolabs? There's so many shifting sands of the narrative at the moment that are just saying there's a conspiracy isn't enough. Just saying there's a new world order isn't enough. Saying Putin's a good guy, a bad guy, that's not enough. There's so much going on here, and we've got to remain alive and think critically. Otherwise, we're just going to be stomped on, because they've got the bullhorns. They own the media. I mean, our lad in Ukraine, Vladimir, the shining light of democracy and freedom, has just shut down all of his news channels and put them into one, so he can control the message. Jesus Christ, that man was being piped into congresses and commons all around the world as a champion of freedom. The man's a dictator. What the hell is going on? So I don't quite remember what the question is, to be honest with you, mate. But I think what I'm coming to is it's so important to remain as critical thinkers and to question everything, because we're being lied to constantly. And that's cool. I'm not angry about that. That's the nature of the system. But it's incumbent on all of us as sovereign human beings, as brothers and sisters and whatevers, to be critical. To look at everything and say, not sure about that. Yes, and those biolabs, etc., etc. It's important for our survival at this point.
Yeah, so perhaps it was because there's so many millions of us who didn't comply then in England. If we was to bring it to the nuts and bolts, like maybe that's just why.
I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
When you not to bring this back to numbers, but when you looked at the vaccine surveillance reports that came out, and then the data just didn't back up this idea that there was a hardcore minority of 10 to 15% of people are unvaccinated. The reality was it was 35% at the height of the vaccination effort. And even then, there were new unvaccinated people being created every single day, because people were going, hang on, I'm not particularly sure about this. And I think a 3 to 5 day illness after the vaccine is probably a worse thing than getting COVID, which at its worst is flu or a cold. So no, I think that's perfectly reasonable that the cohort of the questioning in the United Kingdom was probably a lot bigger to start with. And we're buggers, aren't we? We are the English people, and Scots as well, although, I get into Twitter spats with them, and they fucking love their Cranky, and the Welsh love their Drakeford, though only in the south. Once you get up to mid Wales and North Wales, they can't stand that bugger. But there are quite a lot of, let's say, right-thinking people in England who don't give a fuck and will not be oppressed, which is pretty cool.
Yes, it is. And perhaps that's what did it. And maybe it's because as well, in our history, in like the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, we basically had the same fight where we fought against vaccine mandates and won. It took a very long time, though.
This is do you know about this? Because are you talking about polio vaccines and what went down in Leicester and all that kind of stuff?
So yeah, there was all these groups around the country that were kind of like the groups of today, the Open1, the Save Our Right to Stand Up X, I guess, who were against these vaccines, and the government at first were rolling them out like voluntarily, and enough people, I guess, didn't take them, so then they tried to make it mandatory, and there was a lot of pushback against that. And we, when I think about it, we just had like a sped up version of that, because imagine information dissemination back then, everything that you even get like 1800 memes. That's really funny.
You really?
Yeah, it's brilliant. You think of how much time that must have taken to actually make this meme.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how they organize all these groups with no internet, no phones, no cars, and then they all come under one big banner called the National Anti-Vaccination League. And yeah, after decades of, I guess, a fight against the government, they eventually won and got I think there's some sort of act that was passed through that means that you get the choice. So we basically went through all of that in like 2 years, and that took decades before.
There was one in Moscow as well. I think this was on the Cliff High Telegram channel, if I remember rightly. It was a story of the plague of Moscow. I think it was 1811, and reading the source material on that by the doctors of the time, there were bits of, and this is why it's difficult to unpick history, because the language is different, the meanings are slightly different, and this is why I don't know if you know the work of Michael Sarian, but he does a great job of pulling together antediluvian scripture and going, actually, this meant that, and that meant this, and that means that, yes, fucking aliens. It's really cool stuff. But I was reading this plague business in Moscow, and once you get past the kind of Jane Eyre type language, and I know I'm horrifically generalizing there, you actually see people having nosomic infections and people talking themselves and thinking themselves into having an infection that was rife at the time.
Ah, that's a good one.
And you see, and again, like you say, you see these things just pop up, and you start to wonder. And this is when we get, really, really through the looking glass. You start to wonder, was history fucked with? Has this been rewritten? Has this been suppressed? What actually happened? In whose best interest is it for us not to know this thing, that there is a previous here, that people have fought this battle and won? Because it's not in their best interest for us to know that we had power once. And that's when you get into electric cars back in 1904 and robots and free energy and the Tartarians and the fairs and all that kind of stuff. That's like, oh, that's horrifically interesting, but I don't know where I am on it yet.
What about the idea of a free energy, though? What do you think about that? Some sort of device?
I think it's great. I think it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm gonna have to be careful what I say here, because I don't know enough. I'm not a scientist, but I think there's a reason. I keep coming back to a story I was told about Nikolai Tesla, and Nikolai Tesla's dad worked at the Vatican. And one day he had to go to work with his father. And back then, the Vatican archives weren't behind. I don't know if Angels and Demons, the Dan Brown book and the Tom Hanks movie is true, but they're not behind all that security and stuff. They were just open. There was a library. So for a time, Nikolai Tesla, the young Tesla, was allowed to go around looking at these things. And then he turned into the man that he is, a man who was kind of ignored, vilified, and I think died penniless. But came up with so many incredible innovations. And I don't know the man's work. I've got a book up there by Boscovich, who was his mentor. But it is about that sort of thing. It's about free energy. It's about the ether. And there is so much about this world that we don't understand. And There was a chap that you interviewed, quite a young guy, an American.
Tom Montauk.
Yeah.
He's actually
And
like 40. He just looks really young.
yeah, well, God willing, he's not one of those. But sorry. If you're listening, I'm so sorry. That was a cheap jive. You're not a Clinton. It's cool. But I was reading his book, and I think he wrote it back in 2000, 2007, 2009, about the four bodies that we have. And my first question was, where the fuck did you get this stuff from? And then the second is that you drop back into the, oh, how can you prove it? And then you go, no, just come on, just go with it. And there is where I'm going with this, and coming back to Chinese medicine and qi and energy and all these sorts of things, there is so much we don't know. It's only called dark matter to make it sound like the scientists kind of know what's in the matter. Oh, that matter over there, it's dark, that has meaning. Doesn't mean that. It means they don't fucking know what it means. What's there? It's just fucking space. So if you accept that and start to move on, you realize that there's so much in this world that we do not understand, that possibly has been taken from us. And then you start to look back at, the words in the Bible and giants and the Nephilim and what's the word I learned the other day? Oh, crumbs, it's gone. But it was one of these words that was meant to mean aliens, but actually it meant ship that flies over water. And there it is in the fucking Bible. And you think, well, if all of that is up for discussion, if all of that is a possibility, a potential, then why the fuck should the creator not have put into place a mechanical situation, some sort of order or process where we are given the energy we require for free? Because we're given water for free. We're given energy for free from the sun. You don't have to buy supplements. Take your t-shirt off, sit in the fucking garden before 12 midday. All of these things have been given to us. We are part of the earth. I always say to people, if you take the earth and imagine it as an airfix kit, we're going to be there like the little pilot, stuck to the fucking earth. That's why we walk around bare feet. That's why before 1945-50, the advent of universal wearing of rubber shoes, we didn't have inflammatory conditions, for crying out loud, because we lost a link with the earth. So is there free energy? Well, I'd be fucking surprised if there wasn't. I really, really would, because we're part of the earth. We require energy to an extent. Do I require energy really for this light I've got here to make me look vaguely good looking on a webinar? Probably not, but believe me, it's a fucking good thing. But if we have a requirement, and this is probably the basis of it, if we have a requirement as a human being, then I should think that the earth has a way of servicing that requirement. That's probably the neatest way I can say it.
I like that. That's a good perspective. I think that's a good way to tie it in to, like, we get the water, the sunshine, and why wouldn't there be other means of providing all of our needs in abundance, in vast abundance, like free?
That's a great word. It's a wonderful word, abundance.
Yeah.
Like, so many people live a life in lack, and we're coming back to this. Well, I keep coming back to it about this theme of negativity. And people going, oh, fucking Pfizer and blah, blah, blah. And as I say, that's all true. But if we start to move our thinking into that realm, we are in a state of lack. And the earth doesn't want us to be in a state of lack. The universe doesn't want us to be in a state of lack. It wants us to be a state of abundance. If you want money, and there's no bad thing about money. I'm not one of those guys. It's cool, gives you freedom. You can buy nice stuff. Don't buy too much stuff. That way lies madness. Been there, done that. But you can go out and make money if you understand it. It's an energy, and it comes to those who kind of think about rice, blah, blah, blah. But abundance is there for everybody. It's not a net sum game. It's not a negative net sum. Oh, I always get this one, zero sum game. That's right. Life is not a zero sum game. Just because I have something, it doesn't mean you can't have it either. We can all have it. It doesn't have to be a negative pyramidal structure. We don't have to have people up there and people down there. We do have to have leaders and organizers. I just think socially, that's probably better, that people take responsibility for getting shit done. But does that need to turn into a situation where people think they're better than others? No, it doesn't. And if you're interested in that, Ricardo Bossi in the National One Party has some really interesting ideas about how a government should run. But you're right, there's enough for everybody. We don't have to live in this negative pyramidal structure where it's me against you and you against me, and we're all going, I need to be better than you. we can all be fucking awesome. And that's kind of where I end that statement. We can all be fucking awesome. Don't worry about
Fuck
it.
yeah.
Fuck yeah, man.
I love it, man. So at the co-create a better world, what is your role there again? Are you a coach yourself, did you say?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there are two layers to this. That co-create a better world is essentially a club of three free thinkers. So you excuse me, I've been talking a lot today. You pay your dues, you pay a monthly thing. I can't actually remember what it is. And you can turn up for 5 training sessions per week. We do mental acceleration, so changing your thinking, working without limits, getting rid of the ego, all that kind of stuff. And then with that, you do however little or however much you want. We've got people who do podcasts, people have, got musical careers, people who run their own meditation rooms, blah, blah, blah. We just create. So we get together, we learn ways of being limitless, and then we create within that. And it's kind of evolved into a political movement because that seems very important right now. So the way I tend to look at it is a kind of, and this probably sounds incredibly pious, and for that I apologize, it's not really a fully formed thought yet, is what we're trying to do is train kind of warrior monk type people who practice discernment and critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, decision making, and all that sort of good stuff, and can go out and help people and wake them up and make shit happen, because we really need that. Because if we don't have that, we're basically fucked, in the nicest possible way. And I'm a born optimist, but we need to wake up. So Co-Create's a bit of a club. Council for Human Development is more of a professional training organization. So that was founded by a guy called Kern Frost, who's kind of like a Tesco value Russell brand, as I told him today. Didn't go down very well, very strange. So I worked with Kern for 3 months. We did 3-hour sessions every week, basically breaking down my pre-existing beliefs, all of this crap. Essentially, we've got our core selves, and it isn't located here. This is just where I'm putting it for the purposes of my demonstration. And everyone has that core self, which is hyper creative, hyper aware, hyper attentive. All there is to know because it's out there, and all you need to do is draw it into you, and all this kind of stuff. You can be whoever you want to be. And as we go through life, we just basically inherit a layer of crap. So you've got who your true self is, spark of the divine, hyperlinked to fucking God himself, the Godhead creator, quantum abundance, everything that ever was, ever will be, and ever is. And we just put on, you'll never amount to nothing. Black people are worse than you. Gypsies are horrible. Brexiteers are wankers. All of that is just pushed down until your core self, who the fuck knows where that is. And everybody walks around with these preconceptions about other people and about how the world should be. So we take people through a process where we just say, we swat all that shit away. Do you really, it's kind of I look at it as a kind of a gnosis. What do you actually know? If you don't know anything, then say you don't know anything and move on, because people love to have positions. I used to be like this. I would always have an opinion on something. Even if I didn't know anything about it, I'd always have an opinion. It must have been so annoying. According to my wife, it was. But if you don't have an opinion on it, it doesn't mean that you're not intellectually rigorous. It just means that you're not willing to be tied down to one thing, and you appreciate that there are multiple potentials at any one time, and which potential is right for that particular situation is constantly shifting, which is why people are looking at the world going, what? And that's the way they're trying to make it happen, really. COVID's over. We've got a war there. The war's now dying down. COVID's fucking coming back. Hospitalization in Scotland is up. We need to think about masks again. And everyone's just kept on the hop, which is what they want ultimately. But if you get rid of all of that crap, then you go clear. You have no preconceptions. You can have opinions on stuff. You can think stuff and say stuff, and that's all very cool. But you don't get tied down to one thing. For me, it's I am moral. I think right and wrong are important. I act as if Jesus is watching. That's probably a hangover from somewhere. So we don't see the world as morally neutral, but we do accept there's good and evil. And probably the most controversial thing about what we do and what we say is that we have to accept that 5 to 10% of the people in this world are fucking psychopaths. They just are. And you can't, and I'm not saying they're all in positions of power, but they do gravitate to positions of power because empathetic leaders aren't particularly useful. And you can see that in Jacinda Ardern, but she's only pretending to be an empathetic leader. So at some point, we're going to have to say to these guys, listen, we can't deal with the system as it is anymore. You know, the central bank's going to have to go, all of this shit's going to have to go, but we recognize it's probably bad that we put you to death. And there's a lot of people, a lot of anons, and I don't say that giggling because I think they're wrong. I think there's a lot of real truth in what they're saying, but I think it's important to win the peace. And what we can't do is put them all to death. You know, I think that's counterproductive and against a lot of what I stand for. So at some point, we're going to have to go, look, realize you're a psychopath, but we need to find a role. You know, we've got the empaths over here.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. You don't just get rid of them. How do you use the psychopath?
Can we? Because it's completely immoral. We can't hang them all in military tribunals in Gitmo. And I'm saying, I mean, let's do that to the bad ones. Fuck yeah. But there are a lot of people who, when you go back in time to a wonderful caveman thing, the psychopaths are required. You know, saber-toothed tigers are rampant. There's fucking bears everywhere. What are we going to do? Psychopaths go and deal with that. We're going to stay here with the village, and the empaths are going to teach the kids, and it's all going to be cool. But what happens when all of the walruses and, you know, woolly mammoths are killed? I don't know why they'd be killing walruses, but they just came to mind. The psychopaths now go, I don't have a role anymore. So we go to the village and say, oh, nice village. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. And then you get into this very, very unhealthy relationship. So we've all got to rub along, which again is probably coming back to your point about England and well, I'm going to say England actually, because Wales and Scotland are very different in COVID restrictions. We all tend to rub along. Say again?
They need to catch up.
Oh, they absolutely do. Oh, God bless them. God bless them, but they do, especially the Scottish. I was up in Glasgow a few weeks ago, and I got into a quite spirited, I half remember this. I got into a very spirited discussion with two police officers in KFC. And I kept calling them constable, which they really didn't like. So, no, son, you've got to wear your mask. You're in a hospitality environment. I said, well, actually, Section 45 of the Public Health Act 1984 says, and that's primary legislation, that you can't force me to wear a medical device without my express permission. Put your fucking mask on, laddie, if you want a bargain bucket. I was like, I'll get a kebab. Constable, off you go. But yeah, we do. That's one thing that's actually been quite concerning about this epidemic is police officers. And that's probably where we're going to go, where are the psychopaths? And we're going to go, there they are. They're wearing high vis and stab vests. Oh dear, we're going to have to do something about that. But God willing, we'll remember who we are and that they actually work for us and that common law's a thing and all that kind of good stuff. But my point is, and it's vaguely controversial, but the more I talk about it, I don't think it is, that society is full of empaths, sociopaths, psychopaths, people in the middle, all sorts. We're just going to have to get on if we're going to survive. So we do need to find a way to do it. We can't hang them all, although we should hang some of them. And we can start with Hunter Biden next week. We'll see how that goes.
Why'd you say next week? Is something happening next week?
I get the feeling that energy is building towards some sort of disclosure, and it has to do with Hunter Biden's laptop. And we'll find on there evidence of sexual exploitation, evidence that the Biden family have acted as a conduit for various nefarious networks and groups, and that essentially there is a sitting president of the United States who is eminently corruptible by potentially powers who wish us ill, which is not something that can be allowed to stand. And in my wildest dreams, I think that devolution will kick in and Trump will ride up to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue on a steed and take over the presidency. But we'll see. I like to think.
Yeah, wow. You never know, man.
Dream big. Why the hell not?
Yeah, man. Okay, cool. So, yeah, is there anything else you'd like to share with everyone whilst I got you here?
No, I don't think so. We've had a lovely, I should probably say where you can find the stuff that I do.
Definitely.
So if you're interested in, we do a podcast called The Wake Up, which is basically an hour and a half of light entertainment and kind of arse jokes with me and Kern Frost. It gets us through the day. You can find that on Spotify. You can sign up to the mailing list for that at co-createmovement.co.uk. Get yourself a free book as well. Everyone likes a free book. If you're interested in Co-Create a Better World, you can just Google, we can go to co-createabetterworld.org and join us for a few training sessions. And if you're interested, you can join up and change your motherfucking life, because that's kind of what we're in it for.
Fuck yeah.
There we go. I did have something to say. Fantastic.
Look at that. Brilliant. Well, thanks, Ben, for joining us. I've absolutely loved it. And yeah, everyone go check out his work, what he's doing. It sounds very inspiring. And yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a great, well, I was about to say have a great day. It's 9:15. Sleep well. That's what I'm going to say.
Sweet dreams.
Thank you. Oh, sweet dreams to you too.